Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Vinh Nguyễn, and as my colleague Chung has introduced me, I'm also a Vietnamese language teacher at EALAC, Columbia University. And this is my third year participating in the Columbia Vietnamese Poetry Night. And I'm very honored that we have some guest speakers from Vietnam and from the West Coast. So today I would like to talk about and share some excerpts from English translations of Nguyễn Du's The Tale of Kiều, which to most Vietnamese is known as the Vietnam's national poem, especially from the 20th century onward. But this work was by Nguyễn Du, poet from the late 18th century and early 20th century. Late 18th and early 19th century in Vietnam. And it is a verse tale in the demotic Nôm script. It's in 3,254 lines of Lục Bát poetry, which is in 6/8 meter, which is a very traditional Vietnamese meter for the verse tale of that period. And this work is set in China, actually. So it is an adaptation from a 17th century Chinese vernacular novel, The Story of Kim Vân Kiều, Chin Yun Chiao Chuan. But thanks to the artistry of Nguyễn Du, he has transformed that into a work that is quintessentially Vietnamese and has become beloved by generations of Vietnamese over the past 200 years. So the synopsis is very brief. It's set in the frame story of the Tài tử giai nhân, which is the talent and beauty genre, which talks about the meeting and the separation and then the final reunion of the heroine Thúy Kiều and the scholar Kim Chao, her lover. And because of family crisis, Kiều has to sell herself to save her family from disaster, and she undergoes tribulations during 15 years for reuniting.
You actually don't need, Vietnamese.
Excuse me. So anyway, Nguyễn Du has adapted the Chinese vernacular novel in prose into the verse tale genre in Vietnam. And this genre has a blending of narrative with lyrical moments and philosophical reflection. And so if it is itself a literary translation and transformation of Chinese sources, then what challenge does Truyện Kiều pose to a translation into yet another foreign language like English, which has little cultural overlap with Vietnamese? So that is something that we should keep in mind as we go through a series of different translations of the Tale of Kiều over the past half a century. But before we go into the specific translations, let me speak very briefly about the Lục Bát genre, the Lục Bát meter, which is has 6 and 8 because Vietnamese is a monosyllabic language. So each syllable has one stress, equal stress. And it is a tonal language, which is divided into flat tones, the Thanh Ngang and Thanh Huyền, and then the sharp tones, the 4 tones of trắc tones, sắc hỏi ngã nặng. And so the 6 and the 8 syllables are in different flat tones, either Huyền or Ngang. So it's the distinction, and then the rhymes are in interlacing the 6 syllables and the previous 8 syllables are rhymed together. So it forms a kind of a chain. So it is very melodic in nature as a result. So for example, to take the first 6 lines of the Tale of Kiều, we see that there is the link rhyme ta and la from the 6th syllable is the first and the second line, and then the 8th syllable of the second line is rhymed with the 6th and 6th syllable of the subsequent 2 lines, nhau, dâu, and đau, and then lòng, phong, and hồng. So you see that there is this linkage that is interlacing line with final and internal rhymes, which makes the look back meter a very musical and melodious meter in the Vietnamese language, which is something that some translators have tried to recreate somewhat successfully and somewhat disastrously in English, which is multisyllabic language. Anyway, let me briefly mention that we have no manuscript of the Tale of Kiều from the hand of Nguyễn Du. That is something that in pre-modern literary history we struggle with. And most of the later manuscript date from the late 19th to early 20th centuries. And then there are woodblock and print editions, and some of them have been made available on the website of the Nome Foundation. And there are 5 major woodblock print editions from 1866 to 1902. So mostly you can see it's easily several generations after the death of Nguyễn Du. So there is this distance from the original source. So therefore, there are a lot of variants from between these various editions. And then we have the adoption of the Romanized Quốc ngữ script into Vietnam during the French colonial period. So we have the introduction of Quốc ngữ editions, and then Quốc ngữ and French bilingual editions in the late 19th and early 20th century. And so now we come to English translations, which date much later from the second half of the 20th century. Starting with a prose translation by Lê Xuân Thủy, published in Saigon in 1963, down to Dương Tường translation, which was published just last year in Vietnam, and unfortunately I don't have access to that version. So I will go through and draw some selections and some comparison between these 8 of the 10 English editions that I've listed here. And we will see them how they approach the issue of translating the content as well as the style of Nguyễn Du's poetry in the first 38 lines of the poem, which is the epigraph and the first segment introducing the main characters, especially Thúy Kiều. And then a brief 14 lines coda at the end of the poem. So I will go through, well, first I will read the Vietnamese original. And well, I mean, I just cut and paste this brief excerpt in Nome so that you could see that originally it is written in this kind of logographic script. And then we have the Romanized script transcription of it into Quốc ngữ, which is what most Vietnamese get to learn and get to know it now and in present day Vietnam. So the epigraph reads: Trăm năm trong cõi người ta, chữ tài chữ mệnh khéo là ghét nhau. Trải qua một cuộc bể dâu, những điều trông thấy mà đau đớn lòng. Lạ gì bỉ sắc tư phong, trời xanh quen thói má hồng đánh ghen. Cảo thơm lần dở trước đèn, phong tình cổ lục còn truyền sử xanh. Rằng năm gia Tĩnh Triều Minh, 4 phương phẳng lặng, 2 kinh vững vàng. Có nhà viên ngoại họ Vương, gia tư nghỉ cũng thường thường bậc trung. Một trai con thứ dốt lòng, vương quan là chữ nối dòng nho ra. Đầu lòng 2 ả Tố Nga, Thúy Kiều là chị, em là Thúy Vân. Mai cốt cách, tuyết tinh thần, mỗi người một vẻ, 10 phân vẹn 10. Vân xem trang trọng khác vời, khuôn trăng đầy đặn, nét ngài nở nang. Hoa cười ngọc thốt đoan trang, mây thua nước tóc, tuyết nhường màu da. Kiều càng sắc sảo mặn mà. Does it move to a next screen? Oh, here, sorry. Kiều càng sắc sảo mặn mà, so bề tài sắc lại là phần hơn. Lan thu thủy, nét xuân sơn, hoa ghen thua thắm, liễu hờn kém xanh. Một hai nghiêng nước nghiêng thành, sắc đành đòi một, tài đành họa hai. Thông minh vốn sẵn tính trời, pha nghề thi họa đủ mùi ca ngâm. Cung thương lầu bậc ngũ âm, nghề riêng ăn đứt hồ cầm một chương. Khúc nhà tay lựa nên chương, một thiên bạc mệnh lại càng não nhân. Phong lưu rất mực hồng quần, xuân xanh xấp xỉ tới tuần tập cập kê. Êm đềm trướng rủ màn tre, tường đông ong bướm đi về mặc ai. So that's the first 38 lines, and you could hear the melodious quality of the poetry thanks to the lục-bát rhyme scheme. So here's the epilogue, the last 14 lines of the poem. Ngẫm thay muôn tự sự tại trời, trời kia đã bắt làm người có thân. Bắt phong trần phải phong trần, cho thanh cao mới được phần thanh cao. Có đâu thiên vị người nào, chữ tài chữ mệnh dồi dào cả hai. Có tài mà cậy chi tài, chữ tài liền với chữ tai một vần. Đã mang lấy nghiệp vào thân, cũng đừng trách lẫn trời gần trời xa. Thiện căn ở tại lòng ta, chữ tâm kia mới bằng ba chữ tài. Lời quê chấp nhặt rông dài, mua vui cũng được một vài trống canh. So instead of giving my own translation of this, which I would not dare attempt, I will read the prose translation of Lê Xuân Thủy, dating from 1962 in Saigon, which is a prose translation which hews fairly close to the meaning of the original, of course, without attempting to rendering it into verse or being too creative about it. So that's a good way to start our sample of the different translations of Kiều. Curiously enough, Lê Xuân Thủy omits the last two lines, which is like an apologia. Nguyễn Du apologizing for writing this poem, which doesn't, I mean, it's just for recreational purpose, nothing grand. So it's a kind of a false modesty that you apologize for your work being something trivial and not too serious, but of course we understand that to be the opposite of the case. So here Lê Xuân Thủy translation of the epigraph reads as this: within 100 years of human existence. Oh, I also put up the Vietnamese Quốc ngữ original side by side so that you can compare, if any of you who knows and appreciate the Vietnamese original. So Lê Xuân Thủy reads, within 100 years of human existence, what a bitter struggle is waged between genius and destiny. How many harrowing events have occurred while mulberries cover the conquered sea? Rich in beauty and lucky in life, which translates rich in one thing, poor in the other. Lạ gì bị sắc thư phong. Strange indeed, but little wonder, since casting hatred upon rosy cheeks is the habit of the blue sky. Fragrant manuscripts turned open beside a lamp, and also gallant old anthologies in their bamboo tablets, relate that in the period of Gia Tĩnh under the Ming, when the four regions were pacified and the two capitals well guarded, once there was a family of modest fortune and average station of a notable named Vương. A son Vương Quan, perpetuating a progeny of literacy, was the youngest of the children. The two heavenly fair daughters, Thúy Kiều and Thúy Vân, were as slender as apricot trees, as pure as snow, and diverse in their perfection. Vân's moon-like round face and her brows, like two unrolled silkworms, gave her a very imposing beauty. Her smile, like a blooming flower, and her voice of jade were indeed very comely. And what were the clouds compared to her hair, snow compared to her complexion? But Kiều exceeded her younger sister in grace, charms, and talents. The bow of her eyes looked like two graceful autumn waves, and her brows a mountain in spring. Flowers envied her brightness, and the willow shivered for not being so clear. With one sidelong glance and another, she could subvert empires and put cities in revolution. In addition to her incomparable beauty and her peerless talents, intelligence came to her as a natural endowment. Kiều was not only fond of poetry and drawing, but also of songs and beautiful verses. Being a thorough master of the cung thương five-tone scale, she excelled chiefly in playing the whole guitar and could compose a nice song by using a few familiar tunes. One of her romances, The Cruel Fate, was so sad that it could move one to tears. As a flower among those who wore red trousers, Kiều reached the age of the first pin in the prime of spring. Behind close hangings and discreet curtains, she lived a peaceful life and never minded seductive bees and butterflies who loaf and loaf around on the other side of the east wall. So that's from the first chapter of the 27 chapters that Lê Xuân Thủy divided his translation into, his prose translation. And so now the coda reads, let's meditate, and we shall comprehend that everything does come from heaven. For heaven has condemned men to live and seal their fate. If we are condemned to live a life full of adventures, we must accept it. If we are granted a pure and noble life, we shall be pure and noble. Heaven is partial to no one. Genius and destiny would be too much if they went along with each other. When you are endowed with a talent, don't rely too much on it, for the word tai, which means talent, rhymes with the word tai, which means calamity. Since each of us has a burden to carry, let's carry it and not accuse heaven of what might happen to us. The principle of good comes from our souls, and a good heart is much worthier than all the talents. So we see here a fairly straightforward prose translation. And there are some clunky bits in here because in the poetry of Nguyễn Du, there are a lot of beautiful metaphors and literary allusion, which doesn't really make sense if you translate it literally into English, which doesn't share the same cultural repertoire of cultural and literary idioms like Vietnamese and classical Chinese. So, but this is a fairly honest, straightforward attempt, which helps us understand the basic gist of what the meaning of well, my excerpts at the beginning and the ending of the Tale of Kiều. Now we come to a more elegant literary translation by the great late Huỳnh Sanh Thông, who has a fond place in my heart. Bác Thông translated Kiều twice, first in 1973, it's published by Random House, and then in a revised edition published by Yale University Press in 1983, he rendered his translation into blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter in English. If any of you don't know English, classical prosody, iambic means alternating unstressed and stressed syllables. I will give an example of that soon enough. And then pentameter means a meter of 5 stressed syllables. And so this is a somewhat archaic meter, recalling the language of Shakespearean plays and Victorian poetry. So Huỳnh Sanh Thông was trying to give the English reader a feel for the poetic quality of Nguyễn Du's work by using a meter more familiar to English reader to evoke the literariness and the poetry of the original. And so he adapts it to a melodious quality of the target language, in this case in iambic pentameter. And he also provides copious footnotes for semantic accuracy for his translation, which is really wonderful. So Here I have marked in red all of the stressed syllables of the iambic pentameter verse that Huỳnh Sanh Thông utilized in his translation. So the epigraph would read, and let me exaggerate by stressing the different syllables for you to get a feel for what it sounds like in English. 100 years in this lifespan on earth, talent and destiny are apt to few. You must go through a play of ebb and flow and watch such things as make you sick at heart. Is it so strange that loss is balance gains? Blue heavens want to strike a rose from spite. Well, pardon my exaggeration, but you could feel that there is this undulating quality, rise and fall, and stress and unstressed syllables, giving this a breathing flow that make it sound natural in English, because English is a multisyllabic language, which means that not all syllables are stressed equally, unlike the monosyllabic Vietnamese that, of the original. So Huỳnh Sanh Thông adapting the translation to iambic pentameter give us a feel of what English, natural English sounds like, but in a kind of a poetic meter. So that's a really wonderful example of creativity in translation. So let me read the rest of the first 38 lines and then the coda. By lamplight turn these scented leaves and read a tale of love recorded in old books. Under the Chia Ching reign when Ming held sway, all lived at peace, both capitals stood strong. There was a burgher in the clan of Vương, a man of modest wealth and middle rank. He had a last-born son, Vương Quan, his hope, to carry on a line of learned folk. 2 daughters, beauties both, had come before. Kiều was oldest, younger was Vinh, bodies like slim plum branches, snow pure souls, each her old self, each perfect in her way. In quiet grace, Vinh was beyond compare, her face a moon, her eyebrows 2 full curves, her smile a flower, her voice the song of jade, her hair the sheen of clouds, her skin white snow. Yet Kiều possessed a keener, deeper charm, surpassing Vinh in talents and in looks. Her eyes were autumn streams, her brow spring hills. Flowers grudge her glamour, willows her fresh hue. A glance or two from her and kingdoms rock. Supreme in looks, she had full peers in gifts. By heaven blessed, with which she knew all skills, she could write verse and paint, could sing and chant. Of music she had mastered all 5 tones, and played the lute far better than Ai Chang. She had composed a song called Cruel Fate, to mourn old woman in soul-rending strains. A paragon of grace for womanhood, she neared that time when maidens pin her hair. She calmly lived behind drawn shades and drapes as boors swarmed unheeded by the wall. And then the coda. This we have learned, with heaven rests all things. Heaven appoints each human to a place. If doomed to roll in dust, we'll roll in dust. We'll sit on high when destined for high seats. Does heaven ever favor anyone, bestowing both rare talent and good luck? In talent take no overweening pride, for talent and disaster form a pair. Our karma we must carry as our lot. Let's stop decrying heaven's whims and quirks. Inside ourselves there lies the root of good. The heart outweighs all talents on this earth. May these crude words, culled one by one and strung, beguile an hour or 2 of your long night. So you could feel that this sounds poetic. It sounds a little bit old-fashioned, which in a way evokes the same kind of traditional quality of lục bát poetry in Vietnam, especially after the Thơ mới movement in 20th century, early 20th century Vietnam. So now we have the traditional verse tale in lục bát is a it sounds somewhat old-fashioned, but beautiful in its own old-fashioned way. So Huỳnh Thanh Thâm was, I think, is very successful in capturing the feeling, the meaning, and the spirit of Nguyễn Du's poetry into iambic pentameter in his translation. So now we come next to an interesting challenge that Michael Council sets up for himself. Michael Council is a British man who lived in Vietnam during the war and then went back to London. And then he started his translation in 1968 and then finished it in London in 1994. And then he published it, he gave permission for the Vietnamese publishing house Thế Giới, which is like the state publishing house for foreign language and bilingual editions. So it was published by Thế Giới in Hanoi in 1994. And here, Council gave himself a challenge of recreating the Vietnamese rhyme scheme of Lục Bát. Lục Bát 6/8 meter, so 6 stressed syllables and 8 stressed syllables. So he, in his preface, he says that this is the first time the poem has been rendered into English verse in the same meter as the original and with the same rhyme scheme through, though the internal rhymes are only found in the prologue and the epilogue. Remember my brief discussion of the Lục Bát with the end rhyme schemes between 6 and 8 syllable and then the internal 6. So Michael Council is trying to recreate that in English. But it means that his translation is going to be longer than the original Vietnamese because English is a multisyllabic language. So one word of English could have many syllables. So if you take all of those syllables at equal weight to each other, unlike Huỳnh Thanh Thâm with stress and unstressed syllables, you are going to stretch your translation into a longer equivalence to translate a shorter unit of Vietnamese poetry. So for example, in the prologue, the first 6 lines is rendered into 12 lines of English, and the next 32 lines into 52 lines of English. And in the epilogue, the first 20 lines were rendered into 40 lines of English, and then the next 12 lines into 26 lines of English. And then he, like Lê Xuân Thủy, omits the last 2 lines of the Vietnamese original. So there is this kind of awkward stress on every syllable as the same thing. I mean, you don't speak English with the same stress every single time. That sounds very unnatural, but Michael Council wants to create this challenge and he wants to meet it. And so sometimes I feel so bad that it sounds, I mean, the intention is noble, but sometimes the result sounds like doggerels. I mean, you'll get a feel for it here. So in the prologue, I have marked out the internal rhymes of the Lục Bát that Michael Council does for himself. For example, came and same, way, say, dainty, face, place, space, years, peers, tears, woes, no, so, and so on. So you see that, I mean, he's recreating the Lục Bát meter and rhyme scheme into English, which is really a kind of an innovative way of introducing a foreign language and a foreign literary form into English. So maybe it's a way to enrich the English language, I hope, but sometimes the result can be a bit clunky. So let me read the translation. It's always been the same, good fortune seldom came the way of those endowed, they say, with genius and a dainty face. What tragedies take place within each circling space of years, rich in good looks appears to mean poor luck and tears of woes. which may sound strange, I know, but it's not so, it's not really so, I swear, since heaven everywhere seems jealous of the fair of face. Now you get the feeling that, okay, it does sound something like the Vietnamese look back, but it sounds so odd in English with all of the equal stress of every single English syllable. So this is really awkward. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, it's a noble challenge, a clever way of setting up a language game for himself to play with, but the result is mixed result, I'm afraid. Likewise, and for the sake of time, I'm going to skip some of this. I mean, you could see that, I mean, in the next part, he cannot reproduce the internal rhyme, like here, same came and way say dainty, for example. So here, only the ending rhymes for the bulk of the poem. More than 3,000 lines is in this form, which is difficult enough. But to his credit, for the beginning and the ending of the poem, he tries to recreate both the internal rhyme scheme of look back poetry, which is really noble of him, I must say. Anyway, so let me skip to the, no, sorry, this is the epilogue, not the prologue. Okay, let me read the epilogue then. I mean, and you could hear the internal rhyme scheme and the reproduction of look back meter into English. It cannot be denied that heaven alone decides our fate. Come, let us meditate. If life is filled with great events, accepting what is sent, our soul must be adventurous. If heaven sends to us a life innocuous and calm, then with a gentle charm, we must live pure and harmlessly, quite indiscriminately. Heaven parcels destiny to all. If fortune should befall, the genius none would call that just. If talented, you must not place in that your trust complete. If she is not discreet, a happy miss may meet mishap. Whatever handicap we carry, let us strap it on. When you your armor don, blame not on heaven the consequence. Make pure your heart, and thence a pure life's excellence will pour. Pure hearts are worth far more than mere endowments tawdry fame. Now, I mean, I'm sorry for this exaggerated way of reading it, but that's how the rhyme scheme would work in English, by flattening all of the syllable into equal weight, so that he could recreate the 6 and the 8 syllables in Vietnamese with the internal rhyme scheme and all. Noble effort, but sorry, clunky attempt. And you could see that the original is translated into much a longer number of a greater number of English lines to match the semantic content of the original. So that's one challenge. Now we come to Vladislav Zhukov, an Australian who sets up an even greater challenge of not only doing what Michael Camson could, but could not quite do, which is recreating the look back meter in English. But unlike Council, Zhukov is too clever to know that making all of the same stress equally on English syllabicity is really odd. So he reverts to an iambic meter like Huỳnh Danh Thông that we have discussed before, which alternates stress and unstressed syllables, which reads more naturally in English. So now what he does is to recreate it into iambic look-back meter. What an odd creation. But so unlike Huỳnh Sang Thông iambic pentameter, 5 stresses of iambic alternating stress and unstressed syllables, so Zhukov would do alternating stress and unstressed 6 and 8 lines of different stress syllables. It's a very clever way of doing this, and I must say that it's praiseworthy, and no lesser an authority on Vietnamese history and culture than Keith Taylor would give his imprimatur in writing the introduction to Zhukov in translation in its reprint in 2013 by Cornell Southeast Asian Studies Publications. It was first published in Australia in 2004 and reprinted in the US in 2013. So I've just explained the iambic look-back meter, which is a new combination of English and Vietnamese poetic forms. But the problem is this: Huỳnh Sang Thông does iambic pentameter, which means that he has 20 syllables to work with for each pair of look-back in Vietnamese. So look-back in Vietnamese is 14, 6 plus 8. Huỳnh Sang Thông does iambic pentameter, meaning that he has 20 syllables per couplet. Now, the problem with Zhukov is that by adopting iambic look-back meter, he makes his lines so long. 6 and 8 times 2 is 28 syllables per couplet in his rendition. So in some way, yes, it succeeds in giving the natural feel of stress and unstressed English, and it gives the feel of Vietnamese musicality in recreating the look-back meter, but it's so long-winded. It sounds heavy-handed. I'm sorry, it's twice as long. I mean, 14 syllables in Vietnamese is now turned into 28 syllables in English. So in order to fill up the space, he has a lot of filler in that, and somewhat stilted language, which we will see in a moment here. So I have put boldface all of the stress in the iambic meter, and then the internal rhyme schemes are marked by red and blue here. So, for example, man rhymes with span, and then forlorn, see born, mournful, and heart, part, dot, and so on. So you see that Zhukov sets himself up for a greater challenge, and he meets it. I mean, I greatly admire him for that. But that's the problem. By making it too difficult, the result is also difficult to read. So let me read the opening stanza. Were full 50 the years allot to born man. Oh my God, that's long. How oft his qualities my year within that span to fate forlorn. Oh my God, that's long. In time the mulberry reclaims the song she born, and what the gliding eye my first find fair weighs mournful on the heart. Uncanny may like ever prove love's counterpart, and minded are the gods on rosy cheeks to dart celestial spite. I'm running out of breath as I read Zhukov's translation. I greatly admire its guts, but it's difficult on me. And so here are the other sections, which for the sake of time, I know that I'm running long. So I will skip this beginning part and then go to the final stanza. Consider now all things fulfill high heaven's plan, which sets humanity to thrive as best it can, yet foreordained. Some doomed in dust to live when dead as much have gained, and others gather dignities those two attained by not divine. To both at birth the gods sufficient lots assign, in point of wit and skill and luck, but that alignment vain man shakes. Beware ye masters, love lies a conceit soon wakes. A fate that tells yon master with disaster makes a rhyming pair. And then we carry death from full a dark affair that stains duration's scroll, which we must hate or bear and not blame God. But worthy hearts shall square at last the karmic odds, and sooner quit than shall be the one who humbly plods and flies proud skilled. May these few rustic careless compass thoughts have filled with solace those dull times when centurydoms are stilled and darkness wait. Yes, great effort, heavy-handed result. Sorry. Now some of the other translations that I've collected in the past 10 years or so that have been published in the past 10 years. It's like a boon in translation of Kiều into English. I don't know why. I mean, people think that it's getting easier to understand Kiều and then translate it into English. I don't know, but not all of the efforts are equally successful. So now in 2008, we have an attempt by Arnaud Abbey. He's a British Canadian. And his English version, as stated on the cover of the book and in the preface, is that it's adapted from Nguyễn Viet's French translation of Kiều. Now, he's a British Canadian, so the Canadian are bilingual in English and French. But apparently he's not very well versed in Vietnamese. So his Vietnamese is shaky. So instead of working directly from the Vietnamese, he works, I mean, twice removed from a French translation into an English version, which makes it doubly suspicious in quality. So he renders it in neither verse nor prose, with occasional rhyming at the end. And then the language is clunky and somewhat unidiomatic, and he has many misunderstandings and mistranslation, which is unavoidable, I'm afraid. Let me just read the first few lines and then we'll skip through this because it's really not worth your while or mine. A whole lifetime and enclosed space, 100 years, talent and pitiless destiny face to face. The ocean roars where once mulberries used to grow. Does the sight of this world pierce your hearts aching wide? Why feel surprised? Every bright light has its dark side. Oh, well, right, side, eyes. Pink hue cheeks turns gods crazy for jealousy in heaven above. Sorry, clunky. Okay, the rest, for the sake of time, I will skip. And then we come to a Vietnamese American named Thái Hùng Tâm. I have no idea where he comes from. This is like a vanity project or something. He self-published his work on Amazon, so you can buy it on Amazon.com. So it is in link rhyme verse. So he sets up for himself a challenge. I mean, rhyme verse. But unfortunately, as you can read easily into his translation, that he has a very poor language competency in both English and Vietnamese. And so his understanding of Vietnamese is suspect to start with. And when he renders it into English, it's very often not only unidiomatic, but also ungrammatical. And I don't know. I mean, it's like you throw it into Google Translate and it's probably not much worse than this. So anyway, let me read the epigraph and to see what the horror that this is. In the 100-year span of lifetime, talent and fate usually can be ripe with together. A sea of change been passing over, all been seeing lays me deeper in sorrow. Although I've got time to know, the old sky always likes to drown the beauty. Now the old book is opened newly. And again, the love story cries once more. I'm sorry, this doesn't sound idiomatic, and it's a little bit far from the original. Anyway, so we'll skip through the rest of Thái Hùng Tâm poor translation. And then now we come to Ngô Bình Anh Khoa in 2016. This too is a self-published ebook. Well, maybe a vanity project or not. Now he wants to recreate the look back meter, another noble attempt like Michael Council, but without internal rhymes. That's too hard of a challenge, even for Michael Council. But like Michael Council, the problem is that he turned, I mean, unlike Michael Council, he has the same correspondence line by line. So it's not like twice as many lines like Michael Council's version. But the problem is that he also does what Michael Council does very unfortunately, which is to flatten out the English language and turns every single syllable into equal stress. And that is not a very good result. And I'm sorry to read this from his preface because I'm sorry, I'm much older than 22. So I look at someone at 22 attempting this to be either youthful folly or, I mean, a prodigy. I mean, that's really amazing. I mean, he says, this is by no means a simple task for a student at the age of 22 that he does this. But I tried my best to comprehend the contents, the meanings of the imagery used in the poem, and to search out the English rhymes. So anyway, so let us see the result of Ngô Bình Anh Khoa, which is not as bad as Thái Hùng Tâm, I must say. And so there are some good things in here, not least in the recreation of the look back meter. Through 100 years in life, talent and fate are twined in hate. Though changes in one's fate, seeing things to hearts relay sorrows, counterpoise law or no, heaven envies the rosy cheeked. So you see the sing-song quality of the internal rhymes of look back, life and twine, hate, fate, lay, rose, no, rosy, for example. So there is this good noble attempt, and he succeeds in ways that Michael Council couldn't, but he also falls into the same traps that Michael Council has set. I mean, they both set for themselves, which is the flattening out of the syllabicity of English, which is not an equal a language of equal stress, monosyllabic Vietnamese. So I have also marked out the scroll all told high, well, this is a false rhyme, high, clan, then modest, youngest, harness, honors, daughters, younger. So you see, I mean, he succeeds in recreating the form, if not I mean, it creates a kind of a monster in English in some way, because as I said, I mean, in English, it's unidiomatic, and it's not the language that you stress every single syllable the same way. So, okay, we'll skip the rest of Ngô Bình Anh Khoa translation to come to the last but not least is Timothy Allen's translation from 2019, which is published by the great imprimatur of Penguin Classics, which is now representing Vietnamese literature in the canon of world literature by what I must say, a very misguided translation, a very problematic translation. And Timothy Allen likes to kind of, I mean, to challenge you in some way by breaking the mold. And he doesn't call his work a translation. No, he calls it a work of Nguyễn Du's Song of Kiều. So the name of Timothy Allen doesn't appear in the cover of the book. And he inside the inside cover, he says that this is a reworked into English. Now, from his preface, we see that Timothy Allen doesn't have mastery of the Vietnamese language, because he professed that he has to work with a dictionary hand in hand for every single word. And he started his project as a kind of an exercise in learning the Vietnamese language. And so he comes up with this by really departing somewhat cavalierly from Nguyễn Du's original. And so I think that this is a case of false advertisement to call this Nguyễn Du's Song of Kiều reworked by Timothy Allen, when Timothy Allen really, I mean, neglect Nguyễn Du's poetry, and he just works on what he is obsessed with, which is the Chinese sources. And he tried to breathe life into the plot of the poem, which really derived from the Chinese novel source rather than the Vietnamese verse tale. So in some way, it betrays the whole spirit of Nguyễn Du's work, which is really egregious. And I mean, as a case of misguided hubris, he declares in his preface that I am quite a treacherous translator. I have both added to and subtracted from Nguyễn Du's marvelous text. Okay, I mean, doing damage to this marvelous text, to give the reader something that I hope reads smoothly in 20th century English. Also, now we have to update Nguyễn Du's work into 20th century English. Translators do not keep the original chained up in the basement. An interested reader can always go back to the source. Yeah, easy said than done. And I think that that probably is not a bad idea, because otherwise what we have here is Timothy Allen's own adaptation of the story of Kiều, which is not even Nguyễn Du's or even the Chinese, which is Timothy Allen's version of Kiều, which is really, really misguided in its effort. So anyway, he says, I hope that my version is the most fun to read. Yeah, I mean, as if fun has to be the standard for translation. I wanted to bring out the free-flowing story and the vibrant characters in a way that I felt hadn't been done before. So now, if you can reduce Nguyễn Du's work into a story and vibrant characters in that story, then that's really not much more than the Chinese novel, because the narrative is the main thing. But here, I think that what he's losing sight of, and we should keep in mind, is that the greatness of the Tale of Kiều by Nguyễn Du is Nguyễn Du's poetry. And if we neglect the poetry and the artistry of the poet, then you are really betraying the spirit of the work. And I think that please don't read this translation unless you want to read it to see how misguided it is. And I hope that down the road there will be something to redress this very unfortunate attempt at false advertisement on the part of Timothy Allen. I'm sorry. I hope that Timothy Allen isn't here to listen to me, I mean, rail against his work. But anyway, so here we'll just get a taste for it. I mean, the opening, which we have heard in different renditions before. So now this is Timothy Allen's version of it. It's an old story. Good luck and good looks don't always mix. Tragedy is circular and infinite. The plain never believe it, but good-looking people meet with hard times too. It's true, our ending is inevitable. Long years betray the beautiful. So the whole idea in this beginning is about beauty. And really, the whole idea of Nguyễn Du's poem and the beginning, the epigraph, is really about talent rather than beauty. I mean, so clearly, right off the bat, Timothy Allen has it wrong, even at the basic level of the meaning of the words of Nguyễn Du, he has it wrong. And so he renders it artistically into Timothy Allen's own version of this. And you could read it for what it's worth as Timothy Allen's work about the travails of beauty, rather than Nguyễn Du's really philosophical and poetic reflection on talent and fate. So really, right off the bat, you have a problem here. And I won't bore you with the more examples of Timothy Allen's misguided translation. But anyway, I want to conclude by raising some of the questions that we should keep in mind when we approach literary translation. If we think of translation as a combination of a science, so you need to be accurate, a skill, so you need to be fluent in the language that you operate in, and also an art, which requires some creativity on the part of the translator in understanding and interpreting the original and rendering it as artistically as you can into the target language. So if this is a combination of all three aspects of the work of a translator, then we can have a kind of a standard to judge different translation and see how successful they are in their own ways, because some will focus more on either the science or the skill or the art of it. For example, Lê Xuân Thủy prose rendition is more like a scientific rendition of a literal translation of what the meaning of it is. And sometimes it's not very elegant, it's not even poetic, but I mean, it's truthful and it tries to strive for accuracy. Huỳnh Sanh Thông recreates it into iambic pentameter in English, blank verse. And so there is this element of both a science, because he has a lot of footnote to clarify his understanding of the text, and then his skill, his fluency in both Vietnamese and English, and then the artistic recreation of the lục bát meter of Vietnam to somewhat an equivalent archaic meter in English, the blank verse in English, so that you could get a feel for the poetry in a similarly poetic form in the target language. So you have that, and then you have the examples of Michael Council and Vladislav Zhukov that I have pointed out. Great noble attempt to set themselves the challenge of recreating the lục bát meter into English and enhancing the English language with this new meter. But because of the Michael Council's equisyllabicity, making every single syllable stress equal, which makes it sound very un-English in his attempt to recreate lục bát in English. That's unfortunate. And Zhukov is too long-winded because he doubles the number of syllables to recreate the lục bát meter into this iambic lục bát meter for his translation. And then you have lesser translators like Arnold Abbey, Thái Hùng Tâm, and Ngô Bình Anh Khoa, because of their own limitations in their skill as language skill as translator. They either fall short in the science of it or the art of translation. But we should judge them for what they intend to do. And sometimes they set up for themselves too high of a challenge to meet. And last but not least, Timothy Allen. His cavalier disregard of the original text, his lack of language competency in Vietnamese, clearly he misread and misunderstood the text of Nguyễn Du's poem. And his work is more like a reworking of the Chinese story than the reworking of Nguyễn Du's poetry into Timothy Allen's own version, which is really unfortunate. And which brings me to the point that I want to say in this talk is that there is this famous Italian motto, traduttore traditore. So a translator is a traitor. So by definition, because there is this lexical gap between different words in different languages in the context of the language that they are in, there is no clear equivalence, a semantic equivalence between different words in different languages. So there's this lexical gap. So how do we deal with this? So should we bridge it? or we embrace it? Should we hide and erase it by making it sound natural in the target language and hiding away the difficulty and the thorniness of the original text? Or should we highlight it and emphasize the foreignness of this new work that is being rendered into the target language? So what then should the aims of translation be? Should it be semantic accuracy and stylistic idiomacy in the target language? Or should it be for capturing and respecting the foreignness of the original, knowing that it is the original in a different language? From Nguyễn Du's final 2 lines to the Tale of Kiều, lời quê chấp nhặt rông dài, mua vui cũng được một vài chấm canh. So we see here the double nature of translation as a recreative, chấp nhặt. I mean, stringing different words together to make a new story. I mean, in a way that the Tale of Kiều is, in its own way, a translation of the Chinese novel. So there is this recreative aspect of translation, and there is also this recreational, mua vui, to have some fun. I mean, some moments of fun, and so that could be a language game. So there is this interplay between the semantics or the meaning and content of something, and then the stylistic and prosody, or the style and the form of the other. So there's this interplay between form and content that we should keep in mind when we do translation work, or when we judge a translation work. So if we see Truyện Kiều as its own way a translation, and the task of translating Truyện Kiều through the example of the different translators that I've presented. So should it be plot driven or style driven? Should it be a translation of the story of Kiều or Nguyễn Du's poetry? Should we be aiming for faithfulness to the text and the author, or I mean something else completely for the new text? So there is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just ending very quickly in a minute. So when we talk about standards for good translation, should it be communicative or recreative? And if we think of translation as a bridge, should it lead us back to the original or something new in the target language? But in any case, I think that the important thing is that we need mastery of both languages, the original and the target language. And so in that spirit, I would encourage all of you, especially those who are taking Vietnamese language with me and Cô Chung, is that we need to invest more time and effort at learning Vietnamese so that we can come back and appreciate Nguyễn Du's Tale of Kiều, Truyện Kiều, in its full glory in Vietnamese language, either in Quốc ngữ or in Hán Nôm, in Nôm. So thank you for your forbearance.
Yes, thank you so much for that very erudite presentation.
Okay, let me stop the sharing.